Good day guys, I'm Mini War Painter and I want you to ask yourself a question. All the small decorative items on your minis, like the vials, the books, the skulls, the gems, do you feel like you're not painting them to their full potential? If that's the case, then I'll catch you after the intro. Welcome to the final video on painting Ahriman on YouTube. If you haven't seen it already, there's a video on painting Ahriman's Discus Inch and there's also a video on painting Ahriman's armour. In this video, I'm going to be covering all the decorative elements and trinkets that Ahriman has on his model. This varies from painting gems to painting Ahriman's book that hangs on his waist, going up to the skulls and the vials he's got decorated around the model. Painting these small details helps to add a story to the model itself. If you don't pay these small trinkets the attention that they actually require, then you're missing out on a huge bit of story to the model itself, because these are the items that, in essence, that he keeps around him all the time, and it tells a lot about the character. Yeah. How about we get on with some painting? So today I'll be showing you how to paint all the small intricate details on the model that, when rounded up together, will be almost all you need to understand who Ahriman really is. These details include the burr skull and vial hanging off the leather strap around his waist, his rough textured holster, all the silver metallic details, all the white details such as his horns, the fabric around his waist and hanging from his helmet, the goat skull on his left shoulder pad, and finally all the gems that riddle his armour, along with how to paint the Book of Ahriman that he keeps so close to his right hand. So to begin with, it's Abaddon Black to base his gloves and all the pipes around his armour. Then it's Mechanicus Standard Grey to highlight all the ribbed details in the pipes. The gloves will get highlighted a little differently later. Then it's Dawnstone Grey to add in their spot highlight along the pipes. I like to load just a prick of paint to the tippy-most top of my bristles when attempting such fiddly highlights, so you can literally narrow your concentration to the point. On the downside, however, you risk the paint drying up before you even get your brush to the model, so keep that in mind. Next is a 1-to-1 mix of Thunderhawk Blue and Abaddon Black, watered down to a glaze consistency. This is then glazed in on any part of the gloves that are facing upwards and likely to catch some light from above. Next, I then follow this highlight up with pure Thunderhawk Blue, aiming to amplify small areas of these highlights around the top of his hands and fingers. I chose to use a range of cold highlights on the gloves, purely because I felt his gloves had the right to be a little more interesting to look at over the pipes around his armour. After all, his hands are as mighty as the weapons he carries with him to battle. That's the gloves completed, and you can see that I've looked to keep things subtle with these highlights in order to avoid any attention being taken from any areas of the model I wish to steal the show. Next is a 1-to-1 mixture of Abaddon Black and Black Metal. This is then used to base in all the silver metallics on the model. The key to painting true metallics is to really overemphasize the darker tones in order to allow your chosen reflective areas to really pop out. Then it's pure black metal as I begin transitioning through my lighter tones, building up on where I want the metalwork to reflect. When painting on round or flat surfaces, it's better to glaze in order to collect the pigment on the model into a puddle where you want your highlights to be the most intense. Moving on, it's now Cobalt Alchemy to begin glazing in as I build up the highlights. Cobalt Alchemy has a subtle blue hue to the pigment, which is perfect if you're looking to achieve a nice cold steel effect to contrast nicely with any warm gold trim on your model. Just make sure you reduce the area you apply each highlight to in order to keep your previous efforts still showing. Next, I'm mixing in a little white alchemy into Cobalt Alchemy in order to give me the next tone up to highlight with. This is then applied very sparingly as we don't want to overpower the metallics with too much brightness. Otherwise we risk making those darker tones we based with earlier redundant. In some cases, I've started to stipple this highlight on in order to develop a slightly scratchy texture to the metallics, which is basically applying little pricks of paint in the area, then brush strokes. Then to finish off the silver details, it's pure white alchemy to apply a spot highlight to the centre of all the highlights you've just been building up to. And that's the silver metallics completed, and as you can see we've achieved a really nice polished effect. The metallic paints I've used here are from the Scale 75 paint range, and I swear that they're the best selection of metallic paints I've ever used. They're full of pigment and they come with different hues to try out different effects. Moving on, we're making a 1-to-1 mixture of Abaddon Black and Mechanicus Standard Grey, and I'll use this to base the horns and all the other white details. Because these white details are mainly centered on the model, I don't want them to take too much attention away from anything I want to stand out, like the gems and his face. Which would be the case if I used warm or cold tones to build up with to achieve white. So to avoid this, I'm using grey tones to build up to white instead, in order to keep things neutral. So next I'll use pure Mechanicus Standard Grey to highlight all the ripples on his horns and to layer any raised surfaces to the rest of the shapes in the cloth and on the goat skull, looking to leave the previous darker tones showing in the recesses. Notice as well I've wrapped the model in cling film. This will help protect the hard work you've invested into your Mini from being rubbed off as you attempt to get a better hold on the model to promote stability. We now turn to Dawnstone to begin narrowing down on our highlights, looking to pick out the areas we want to stand out more. Now that we've established where we want our highlights to build up at, I'll now use Administratum Grey to take these further as we get closer to white. Notice on the smaller horns I apply this to the inside edges that lead to the face. This will help with the effect of drawing the viewer's gaze to our focal point. Then, as we reach the cloth, I begin stippling this highlight on to simulate a fabric texture as well as a bony texture for the goat skull. Now that I've gotten this far, I decided not to go to pure white as I'm going to settle for an off-white by making a 1-to-1 mixture of white scar and admitistratum grey. And that's my off-whites completed, and to me they bring great contrast in texture to the model against the polished armour and gold trim, and because they're a neutral off-white tone they don't distract you from appreciating the rest of the details either. I now turn to dried bark to begin basing in the leathery details such as the belt that hangs from his waist and his holster. Then to highlight these worn textures, I'll begin stippling on some Gawthor brown. This will be focused to the top edge of the belt and to the bottom corner of the holster that has a hope of catching any light. Then I'll move on to glazing in a 1-to-1 mixture of Abaddon black and dried bark. This is to help darken sections of the belt at either end, so that the centre of the belt is more visual, which is in line with the face, as well as to add a darker shadow to the holster under his arm. Then it's over to Baneblade Brown to finish off the highlights, which is again applied by stippling it on. Then I go straight into basing the burst skull and claw with dried bark, which will help tie these items in with the leather later on. Next I'll layer the skull and claw with Zandri dust, leaving dried bark in the recesses of the skull and base of the claw. Then I turned to a 1-to-1 mix of dried bark and Zandri dust to glaze in areas where I felt pure dried bark was too dark in tone. Next, I'll mix Zandri dust and Ushanti bone to begin highlighting the skull and claw. Then it's pure Ushanti bone to finish them off. Here you can see the leather details I finished earlier and how the base coat I gave the skull and claw helps tie them in together. Moving on to the small vial he has, I'll base this with Abaddon Black, as I'll look now to treat this as a gem. Then it's Keldor Sky to glaze in the first highlight, which I like to gauge the consistency of by applying some to my thumbnail, looking for it to just tint the surface. I'll glaze this now by drawing the pigment to build up at the bottom left corner of the vial. I'll let each layer dry fully before applying another, until I have a nice blue starting point. Then I'll move on to Teclis Blue and then glaze in my next highlight, making sure not to apply too much and lose out on my first glaze of Keldor Sky. I'll now use Lothering Blue next to highlight up to. Then to finish things off, it's a 1-to-1 mix of Lothering Blue and White Scar, just to add a spot highlight to the centre of my blue transitions, and to add a couple of white dots to the top of the vial to simulate some of the light reflecting back off the glass. Next I move on to the Book of Ahriman and the gems, which I base first with Cabalite Green. Make sure you establish enough thin coats to get a good coverage. Then it's Cyberite Green, which is made into a glaze for the gems. I want these gems to stand out more on the armour, which is why I'm taking a different approach to how I normally paint gems. So rather than basing black and glazing to the lower left corner of each gem like I did to the blue vial, I'm building my effect to appear as though the gems absorb light a mysteriously different way than normal, making them appear to glow instead. Then I'll go back to Cyberite Green, and with a more thicker consistency I'll begin layering on some highlights along the edge of the book and on the only corner that stands a chance to see some light. Same again now with Ghostbuster Green. I'll mix enough water into it to turn it into a glaze, and I'll apply this in the same manner as before to the gems, making sure to leave some of my previous tones showing in order to develop those seamless transitions. Then picking out a more thicker consistency of the Ghostbuster Green, I'll now look to edge highlight and stipple some texture onto the Book of Ahriman, aiming to create that ancient appearance. Then it's a final highlight of a 1-to-1 mix of White Scar and Ghostbuster Green to all the gems and to pick out the corners of the book. Off camera, I also applied a coat of Lamia medium to all the gems and the vial I painted earlier. This will help bring together all those transitions I've glazed, giving them all a more consistent finish. Moving on to the pages to the Book of Ahriman, I'll base these first with Zandu dust, making sure to leave nothing black behind. Then I'll attempt to freehand in some thin lines of Ushanti bone, aiming to create some form of pages. Finally, I'll go again at each free-handed page with a final highlight of pallid witch flesh. Then to neaten up if needs be with some Ushanti bone to redefine any pages I may have messed up. With the pages completed, it's time to move on to the gold details, which I start by basing with a 1:1 mix of Rhinox hide and Negro gold. I'll then give the gold details an edge highlight of pure Negro gold. Then to finish it off is a final highlight of a 1:1 mixture of Negro gold and Kunzite alchemy. And that's the book completed, along with everything else I wanted to cover. It's good practice to take advantage of these small features to any model, because you can really take the opportunity to try something out you've never done before, whether that's a new colour scheme or a new painting technique. If it looks good, it'll make your model look amazing. If it's rubbish, well, it's so small no one will notice. It's a win-win. On that note, I'll now show you Ahriman fully painted and completed. Overall, I've spent around 2 weeks solid with a couple hours a day painting Ahriman to getting him finished. He's been a fantastic model to paint and by far the biggest learning curve in my own painting development, as I've taken a huge interest in painting different effects to creating different textures. If you wish to learn how I painted Ahriman's cape, the smoke around his hand and the OSL power stave he has, click on the link to my Patreon account in the description box below and you'll be greeted by me again in a small little intro video where I'll show you everything you've got to look forward to should you wish to join me. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching guys, I hope you found this video useful. Painting all these bits and bobs, all these trinkets and decorative items in Ahriman, it's a good opportunity to have a break from painting, you know, the armour, the boring gold trim, all the things that when you batch paint, you're painting consistently and you just had enough of. Whenever you get a model with all these unique items on them, it gives you a chance to crack open some different paints for a change and just go crazy, try something new. I mean, they're so small. I mean, it's going to go one of both ways. It's either going to be, oh my god, that's, you know, really amazing gem. I've blown myself here. You know, I'm actually quite good at, you know, glazing and working with these different colours. Or it's going to be, it's a small thing. No one's going to see that. It would be right. At least you've got some practice in. So yeah, take advantage of all these small items that you find on your HQ models, especially. Don't let those opportunities go to waste. If you haven't already, I'm on Instagram. You can find me at miniwar_painter. Over on Instagram, I'm continuously posting pictures and stories and so on about all the things that I'm painting, you know, up to date. So if you want to keep yourself in the know of what's going on in this reality of mine, yeah, go give us a follow, and feel free to drop me a message at any time you need a bit of advice or a bit of help on choosing, you know, color schemes or painting techniques towards getting around a certain a certain small decorative item on your model. Next to that, if you're a super duper keen painter like myself and you want, you know, more for your minis and you really want to go the extra mile with them, you'll find my Patreon account. If you look in the description box below, there's a link that'll take you over there, and on there you've got a vast amount of tutorials on there showing you all the more intricate and complex painting techniques that I use for painting things like OSL, old parchment, and, you know, with all the text and the writing, going to flames, you know, all that jazz, and the rest of the content for Ahriman. So if you want to learn how to paint his crimson red cape, or the smoke that comes from his hand, or even the OSL effect that I've painted on his stave, you'll find all that over on Patreon. Ready now, good to go. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't be shy to mix those paints. Ta-ra.